Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast, is for anyone interested in leadership and the wins, losses, and lessons of being an executive. We are two women who have successfully navigated C-Suite roles and are sharing our experiences. We will be bringing on guests to tell their stories and want to spark honest conversation and discussion, which may include swearing and lots of laughs. Join us on this adventure. Hi there, it's Juliet here with Susan and another episode of Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast. We're so grateful that you're listening and sharing the podcast with your friends and colleagues. Today we have a special guest that I'm lucky enough to call a friend and colleague, Kim Bender. We'll introduce Kim shortly. Hi, Susan.
Hey, Juliet.
Did you know that we are closing in on a total of 500 downloads of our show?
I have to confess to having been completely oblivious to that number. And I actually do look at those emails when they come in. And I'm thrilled. I'm just so thrilled that we've had such a positive reception to this project of ours that we started as a pilot. Like, let's just see how it goes. Two people with a lot of experience in leadership, thinking that we had some things to say and that we wanted to invite people to come talk with us about things that they had to say. My goal was never to be the number one podcast on Apple, but 500 downloads in less than 6 months, pretty excited about that.
Yeah, I mean, it feels really good. I've heard a lot of positive feedback, and so far, no trolls or anything. So that feels like a positive thing these days.
Absolutely.
One of the things I'm kind of was reflecting on when I was looking at that number and thinking about how I feel about myself doing this podcast, because of course, I hate your voice. Oh, that's dumb. When I'm editing, I'm listening to it and, criticizing myself. But over time, I've really learned about self-acceptance. And I do feel like I'm much more accepting of kind of how I show up and how I present. And I think a lot of it has to do with this podcast and just kind of when you're done, it's recorded. You can't go back. You kind of just got to go with how it is. And I think that's helped me a lot. I've been coaching some emerging leaders, as you know, and I'm finding a lot of them struggle with self-acceptance, worrying about how they're going to sound, how they're going to show up. Scared to speak up in meetings. And one thing that I'm really encouraging them is to be bold. What are the questions you're not asking, and get more comfortable with the idea of talking to someone in the company, maybe their boss, maybe their boss's boss, asking for a meeting, and ask them those questions that they're afraid to ask. Like, how did you get here? Where could I be going? Just kind of starting the conversation and not being afraid to ask for direct feedback. And I think that it's something that a lot of young people struggle with, and a lot of people who are in the C-suite probably struggle with it too. And so I just have a question for our listeners. What is the question that you are afraid to ask? And with that, Kim Bender is a senior strategist with over 20 years of leadership experience in community health, economic justice, and arts organizations. She currently specializes in nonprofit executive coaching, collaborative program design, community-centric fundraising, and board development strategies. Kim brings a collaborative, exploratory, and practical lens to all her engagement, with values rooted in radical inclusiveness and unconditional love. Yay! From 2020 to 2024, she served as executive director of the Healthcare Foundation, Northern Sonoma County, driving its transition to a leader in community-centered fundraising and trust-based philanthropy. I want to hear more about that. Kim served as a senior development director at the Glide Foundation, which is where Kim and I met. And she also served as a leader in development at BAMPFA, SFFilm Foundation, and the California Film Institute. Welcome, Kim Bender. Hi, Kim.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Excited to have you. It's great. So we talk a lot on this program just about kind of the journey, how you got into leadership. We're finding a lot of people found their way by accident, which I think is kind of a fun secret, and that I often share with people, like, be ready for the accident to happen. What about you? How did you get into leadership roles?
Well, what comes to mind first is that I'm a 6'1" tall woman, and people just assigned leadership to me since I was a kid, whether I liked it or not, which I did like it. But as my career evolved, I went to UC Berkeley, I went to film school in LA, and was going to be a producer, but I just hated all the crappy material I was finding in Hollywood and decided to be a writer so I could produce my own work. And that's the career path that kind of took me out of Hollywood and toward nonprofits. As a producer, I was raising money to make films. That, like, being a producer is all about raising money. So as a 23-year-old in LA, I was learning how to ask people to do things that they never thought of doing, and for free, and giving money. And that is the skill set that resulted in my career path. When I moved back up to San Francisco, I started out at the San Francisco Art Institute, was there for about 5 years, not raising money, but helping students take out loans that they would never be able to repay. I would tell them when they were signing the loan documents in triplicate after I typed them up on a Selectric. That tells you how old I am. And after that, kind of began working on helping filmmakers raise money for their films by writing grants. That translated into a job at Marin Academy in San Rafael, raising awareness, which I learned later was a fundraising skill. Communications and fundraising are very intertwined. And then I was tapped. I lived in Bolinas at the time, and I was tapped by the community after I began writing grants for a firehouse and clinic project to be the capital campaign director. And it happened in a car ride from Bolinas to Dogtown, about 10-minute drive. They said, "We want you to be the campaign director," because the director had cancer and wasn't able to complete the project. I said, "What are you talking about? Like, I have no experience doing this. No." By the time I got to the board meeting happening in Dogtown, I agreed and was like, I'm in over my head. But one of my mentors had told me, how you learn is by occasionally getting in way over your head. And I was. So that was a very complicated 5-year project that involved multiple boards, the fire district, the utility district, the Coastal Health Alliance, the park where we were building the buildings. But it was an amazing learning experience. I like complicated partnership arrangements, and I was able to put that deal together and ended up having to do a parcel tax campaign, raise about $7 million, which at the time felt like a lot. Not so much now, but so that led me to, after that project was finished, I worked at the San Francisco Film Society, trying to bring back my film career as the Foundations and Major Gifts was my title there. And so basically the development director, we had somebody else doing corporate. And that was another great learning experience. Both of them required all kinds of skills, developing relationships with major donors, as well as grant writing and relationships with foundations. Not so much government grants, though, a little bit. That took me through another couple turns in the film world in the Bay Area. But one day, one of my colleagues, formerly at the Film Society, Steve Jenkins, called me when I was working at BAMPFA, the Berkeley Art Museum Pacific Film Archive, and asked if I would please consider moving to Glide. They were hiring a major gifts person. And I just, as a courtesy, it wasn't my thing, I wasn't thinking about it, but I went to an interview at Glide where, were you at that interview, Juliet? I don't remember.
I think so. Yeah.
You were, yeah. Mm-hmm. And they gave me a tour of Glide, and I had always gravitated in my career towards social justice projects among the arts projects, or even, wherever I was. And I did side projects that had social justice themes. When I met the people at Glide, I was just there was no going back. I was so moved by the women's program in particular, talking to the people there, and I made the change. I moved out of the arts and into social justice at Glide. So that was the biggest, that evolved from the major gifts position to the senior director of development, responsible for raising about $13 million a year. So all my previous experience really played into it. Overseeing a grants team, a corporate team, the communications team, and the major gifts team, and successfully raised a lot of money. And Juliet would count the money.
Kim was my best budgeter. She really helped me see that there can be a partnership between development and finance. Up to that point in my career, there was always this tension between the two, and it's not that the tension wasn't still there, but we were definitely partners. It's like, okay, I need to do this. How can I do it? Where am I going to find these numbers? And so I really appreciated that. And it was a good model for how I try to approach the relationship between development and finance to this day. So
I would present Juliet a budget, and then she would come back and say, we need another million, or we need,
that's great. That's true. Yeah.
Only if we need another million.
Yep.
I would try to, adjust my expenses and set higher goals as aspirational, but we usually met them. I think we did. Yeah. Glide is a very special place. So it's, yeah. Yay, Susan.
I was just going to say, so Juliet, clearly working with Kim was a pivotal experience in terms of your concept of how to be a really great CFO. I'm wondering, Kim, if working with Juliet had the same sort of impact on you. What did you learn working with Juliet?
What Juliet said, we became partners. If I had a problem, I would, very clear and transparent and regular communication with the CFO was transformative because we weren't at odds. We were working together for the same goal. She would share with me some of the challenges and I would share with her mine, and we would find ways to solve those problems. It did set a standard, however, that was hard to meet in the future.
Definitely.
Her successor did not meet that standard, which was very tough. It was very hard to work with people who didn't have that same spirit and knowledge. I lured Juliet back to work with me at the Healthcare Foundation. After I left Glide, I moved. I was consulting for about 9 months, and I had this feeling I needed to get another job. I was also moving to Sonoma, and fortunately, I did have a job. I wasn't consulting when the pandemic hit, and I was in the business of raising money for healthcare. So it was a very timely engagement. But I lured Juliet to be on our finance committee, which she served on for several years. So it was super helpful to have someone with her knowledge to help explain, accrual accounting, which all of my nonprofit board members did not get until Juliet said it probably 5 times at meetings, and I would repeat. So that was super helpful. It was wonderful to work with Juliet again.
Yeah, that was a fun stint, and just being in an advisory role was really exciting, and I learned so much about just navigating the North Bay and all the health issues and all the organizations that you were working with. So it was a great experience for me. I was saying earlier before we started recording, I just want to note this because Glide is a wonderful organization, but it also has it's serving a lot of different populations at different times. Board, staff, frontline workers, the community, a lot of people who are, struggling. And so we were, there's a lot of balancing that was going on and trade-offs and challenges, like Kim was saying, things that we'd never done before or experienced before. And it's just like, okay, we're just going to wing this and we'll figure it out. And Kim and I would pass each other in the hallway and just say, it's going to be great. And we were talking about how we need to bring that back these days and just try and remember that it's going to be great. Don't know what it's going to look like, but it's going to be great. So anyway, one of the questions we ask everybody, so we'll ask you this one, which is, what is one secret you've discovered about being in a leadership role in the C-suite, and that you think you would be helpful for our listeners?
One thing that I've learned as the executive director and even as the development director at Glide and at other places where I was not the executive, but I was a senior development director, is that staff, including the ED and the senior director of development, need to be involved in board recruitment and the selection of the officers. This might chafe some board members to know this, but others really do get it, that the relationship between the executive, the development director, and the board need to be harmonious and on the same page. Of course, you do want dissenting voices as well, but that will always come up. Hopefully, if you choose intelligent, well-rounded, emotionally mature board members. One of my friends makes emotional maturity part of her checklist, really overtly and explicitly, which I think is a great idea. Then you're going to be able to accomplish so much more. So I think that is something that I've learned from colleagues and from experience, that really having a diverse board, but where everybody truly wants the same mission and is simpatico and has great communication skills. That's very important, more than whether they bring in the big dollars. Though that's important. That is important.
Make the rule clear.
I can't help myself, Em. I'm really curious how one tests for emotional maturity in the search for a board member or colleague. Because I'm absolutely in agreement with you that emotional intelligence and emotional maturity really matter especially at the board and senior level. But how do you get at that?
You talk to other people. If they have board experience, you talk to other members of that board. It's a lot of intuition. And the more you have one-on-one engagements prior to inviting someone to be on the board, the more you can, and you have multiple other board members also having those intimate meetings where you can ask hard questions, as Juliet has brought up today. It's really, it's a feel thing. You can't ask the question, are you emotionally mature? You watch how people behave at community meetings. You listen to what they say and believe them. It's tough, and you're going to make mistakes. But I think if the culture of the board is around friendly, mature, productive meetings, which was my campaign slogan when I ran for a couple positions as a public official in Bolinas, friendly, short, productive meetings, then you just do your best. That's all you can do. But you have it as an explicit criteria among you, so that if the shiny skill set or resources are distracting, you can really see, are they going to be productive and helpful and on the same page about your mission?
Yeah, my mind is just blown by the explicitness of that. And Juliet and I, of course, have talked over the years and on this podcast and privately over probably too many glasses of wine about how frequently you see emotional immaturity shaping the workplace, whether the leader is emotionally immature or handles a situation, or someone in the C-suite where you're just looking at the dynamic and going, what are you, 12? You arguing over the toys and who gets what? And I'm being sort of flip about it, but I think we can see that also in the zeitgeist now, that it's clear that there's a lack of emotional maturity in some places. I'm going to just stop right now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So it's creating a culture, and the leadership, the executive director, and I will say the development director, who is behind the scenes helping push projects and work closely with the executive, they set that culture. So the emotional maturity of the executive and the development director are key. And so setting that tone and finding other people who have that enthusiasm and maturity it's a guidepost.
One thing that I really like that you said about being a leader, being a good leader, especially of boards, is having productive and brief meetings. So you're really digging into the meat of the problem, but you're not, allowing for going on and on and on, and people to get on their soapboxes, and being able to, bring the group together to solve the problem, whatever it is. And there's always a problem. Can you tell me about some hits and misses there?
Well, one of the techniques I developed while at the Healthcare Foundation that worked pretty well was really putting times on the agenda and leaving a large section for discussion. Because one of the reasons those meetings go on and people are, wanting to expound on different topics is the purpose, that why a person becomes a board member is to connect and feel purposeful. And so and not just to hear reports that have already been sent in the board packet. So creating room on the agenda for open discussion. Usually you want to have a topic or theme, so it's productive, but it allows people to share their thoughts and bring their intelligence to the larger mission, rather than getting caught in the weeds, which is a big waste of time, because the staff is there to handle all the actual operations. So I think as a leader, creating room with a specific time frame on the agenda really helps, and having time frames for the other more business topics so that people understand that their reports can be all in writing and they just give top line information that may not have made it into the report that they want people to hear. So I think in addition, boards want to feel a sense of identity around their participation in this organization. So having time for social interaction, either before or after a meeting or off-site, having an annual board retreat where people really can get to know each other, having very structured and intentional board orientations for all new members. I like bringing in a cohort. That really works well, because then people have buddies that are new, but really getting them oriented. I scheduled at the Healthcare Foundation the board retreat in October, and we would bring in the newly confirmed board members to that meeting, and they would officially start in January. So they'd have had their orientation. So they were up and running their first meeting. They've met everybody. They've had this longer half day or whole day to talk about the mission and the plans. And then they're fully integrated by the time they hit their first meeting.
That's a fantastic structure. I know you're doing consulting now. So you've left the Healthcare Foundation and you're doing consulting. Can you tell us about how that's going for you? What are you finding out there? I know you're focused on nonprofits.
Yes, I'm really enjoying executive coaching, particularly with nonprofit leaders of color who have found themselves as executives, but didn't necessarily come up with development background, with raising money background, or much board experience of their own. So that's been very rewarding, because I said 20 plus, but really 25 plus now years of working with nonprofits and boards, So it's been so rewarding to share what I've learned as a white middle-aged woman who's been on, in this role for so long with young people of color who are unfamiliar with how to manage up an often largely white board. So I'm sharing my secrets and my, things that I've learned with them. And it's just incredibly, as I said, rewarding. And I get very positive feedback from that. In addition, one of my sweet spots, I think, forged in the fire of the Bolinas Firehouse and Clinic building project, which was a capital campaign to build those 2 buildings on a partnership with all those organizations. So complicated. I really like partnerships and I believe in partnerships. And so one of my new clients is the West Marin Housing Collaborative. I'm excited to get started with them, but it's 4 organizations working as a collaborative to solve the housing crisis in West Marin. But this is an example of where my experience really comes in, is helping develop partnerships. It was definitely my strong suit at the Healthcare Foundation, where we had to raise money to be able to give money away. But how that worked best was when we were putting organizations together, applying for funds from foundations. So partnerships are my strength and I love them. And I really am encouraging all nonprofits to think about partnerships, especially right now.
I think you had a comment when we asked what else you wanted listeners to know. And I love that. Don't start a new nonprofit. Look for an existing partnership, basically. And I think that's, as the finance person in consulting, my first question to a nonprofit, if that's where I'm working, if that's a potential client, is why do you exist? And are you the best at this thing? Because there's 20 other organizations in a 50-mile radius who are doing the same thing. So I think that, same on the finance side of things. It's like, are you really the best? And I think, we talked a lot about that when we worked at Glide, is the programs that we were doing, making sure that we asked ourselves those questions as often as possible. So I love that. So what are some other challenges you see, with this new administration in the nonprofit sector? I think there are changes happening. I know a couple of former clients who are really struggling.
Yes. Well, it's a confluence of so many factors that are bringing nonprofits to the place they are right now, which is in a very dire situation. Among those, before the new administration, was the end of the COVID relief money that came from the American Rescue Plan Act that infused nonprofits all over the country with significant money to continue. And what happened is a lot of nonprofits staffed up and blew up their budgets. And that money ended in December of 2024. And that cliff was known, but I think that many new leaders were not prepared for what that meant. In addition, we had inflation, which really caused nonprofits to have to stretch their dollars further as this cliff was coming. Also, the California budget was in a deficit last year, not now, fortunately, but so many of the state programs were being cut. And now we have this new administration on top of it all, who is questioning any group that's involved in any kind of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging work, which most nonprofits are. They're also, the administration is questioning any foundations and their 501, even 501c3 status of nonprofits doing that work is in question, potentially. But the budget cuts that have been presented for for this government money, which most nonprofits do depend on in some form, whether it be money that trickles down from the federal government to the states and local government, such as the county here in Sonoma. And I'm talking to colleagues who are facing potentially $10 million cuts to their budget. They cannot exist. So all the services to provide medical services, this country, because the safety net is so weak and thin, it depends on nonprofits to provide services. And if that gets pulled, which it looks like it's happening, we don't know. We don't know. People are in very dire straits. So my advice to folks, all my nonprofit colleagues, is look for partnerships, merge, consolidate, be real. Don't make any big plans for new expansion or adding staff right now. What you need to do is be realistic, hunker down, work on your relationships with your major donors who are not subject to governmental regulation yet. Who knows? But look to foundations. So you need to diversify your funding. Do not count on any government funds right now. That even if right now for fiscal year that we're in, you have those funds, we do not know. So you need to be making contingency plans, talking to partners, considering merging, considering even sunsetting in some cases. Mergers, nonprofit mergers are a thing, and there's a way to do it. It takes some time. It takes a minimum of 6 months, but it's time to start looking at those radical solutions if you want to continue your service. And it's going to be tough times for the next 4 years.
Definitely. I think it's a wake-up call for sure. But I think there's so many good lessons in there in terms of diversifying. That's one thing that I always look at. And when I also, am evaluating a nonprofit is, if you got 80% of your funding coming from one source, you are already in trouble, and you don't even, you're not aware of it, and it can come quickly. So I want to ask a question about challenges you've had in the C-suite. And, we all have had some surprises in joining a new organization, a new company, and, things you didn't hear about in the interview, alliances that aren't as strong as maybe you thought they were. And I just wonder what your stories are.
Well, I think, like you, Juliet, having to fire people as a compassionate, collaborative leader, it's very hard. The couple of situations that surprised me were when one of my own hires, my own assistant that I interviewed, extensively, I learned that she had misrepresented her skills. And I was willing to work with her and get her professional development. But then I started receiving pictures of her sleeping in the phone booths at the WeWork offices that we were at Glide. And it's like, okay. Even my beloved leader, Rita Shimon, said, you got to fire her now, like today. Like it was so painful. But things like that, having to fire a very senior construction manager during the Bolinas project, and I was just another consultant running this campaign, and the two board chairs sitting across that we'd scripted out what we were going to say. Neither of them stepped up and said the words, "We're going in a different direction." And so the moment came and I had to say it. So I think being prepared, even when your much respected board members have said they'll say something, you have to often, as an executive, step in to cover them. And that's often the case, that you have to cover them because they're volunteers. You're the staff. You know what's happening. You know the scripts. So
I agree. I think we often forget that they are volunteers, and they need a lot of support in that role. And so, yes, you want to depend on them, but there are times when you just have to step up and fill in the gaps.
Just thought I would flip the question on its side, Kim, the one that Juliet asked you, which is, as you think about your career and experiences in the C-suite, is there anything that stands out to you as such a wonderful upside surprise?
Relationships, relationships, relationships. Everything is about relationships. And if you care about making progress on your mission, never neglect relationships at any level. Your lowest level worker and your highest level donors, everything in between. It's all about relationships, seeing people for who they are, what they offer, the gifts that they bring, celebrating those. That is the key to success.
With that, I think we're going to close out on the interview. This has been great, Kim. Thank you so much. I'm so glad we got to do this. And I just appreciate your friendship and your partnership over the years. And I'm so excited we got to have this moment together.
Thank you so much, Juliet and Susan. It's such a pleasure. And thank you.
We're so glad you've joined us for this episode of Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast. We'll be back with another episode in 2 weeks. In the meantime, please tell your friends and coworkers about us, and be sure to follow, subscribe, and give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed listening. Secrets of the C-Suite is produced by Juliet Clothier, Susan Sutherland, and Brian Clothier. Original music is by Brian Clothier. And the podcast is inspired by leaders like you.